Welcome back to Pod Save the World. I'm Tommy Vietor.
I'm Ben Rhodes.
Ben, today's episode is for people who love Team USA only.
Yeah.
So if you're the 45th president of the United States or one of the assembled MAGA Aryan youths he spoke to on Saturday who booed the women's soccer team, we need you to log off, delete the episode.
Hit up the Russian Olympic Committee.
Yeah, the Rock
podcast. The Rock podcast. Yeah,
the Rock is ready for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, we got a team for you. Get the fuck out of here.
Yeah.
we don't want you on this show. But for those of you who love America, we have a fantastic show here. Lots of jingoism, as you just heard. We will also cover some international legal trouble for the former chair of Trump's inaugural committee. The Iraqi prime minister visited Joe Biden in the Oval Office. We'll talk about some of the announcements out of that. Why people are flipping out about Ben & Jerry's ice cream in the most exhausting way possible.
Mm-hmm.
We have a special committee.
Cherry Garcia, yeah.
Cherry Garcia,
Yep.
Chunky Monkey. Xi Jinping visited Tibet. People are manipulating the weather. Playing God, if you ask me. And then we have lots of fun Olympic news. Want to start with something cathartic?
Yeah, let's do it.
Tom Barrack.
Yes.
Not good.
Not good.
Fresh legal trouble.
Not
in
surprising,
Trump world.
but not good.
Yeah, this isn't any of that dated, impeachment legal trouble. This is fresh, right off the vine legal trouble, with an international flavor, so it works for us. So Tom Barrack is the former chair of Trump's inaugural committee. He was charged with illegally lobbying the Trump campaign and the Trump administration on behalf of the United Arab Emirates. Barrack was also charged with obstruction of justice and making false statements to the FBI. That's bad. The gist of the legal problem for Tom Barrack is that you are allowed to lobby on behalf of a foreign government like the UAE, but you have to register first as a foreign agent with the Department of Justice or else you get in big trouble. And it sounds like Barrack didn't do that, and then he put a lot of his work in text, Ben. Text, emails, they all found their way to prosecutors. I think the one you liked the best was I nailed it for the home team, I think.
Yes. Well, I mean, there's a theme here, right, which is these guys, Trump and his cronies, wrap themselves in America first, neo-fascist rhetoric.
Mm-hmm.
Yet they root against America's sports teams. The home team is the Emiratis.
Mm-hmm.
Like they're consistently working on behalf of foreign interests. I mean, I think here the couple of things that jumped out at me. First of all, like the scale of this, right? There are a bunch of FARA cases where people are doing stuff and they don't register, and that's
as far
bad.
as the Foreign Agent Registration Act.
Exactly, right? But this was like, this guy was inserting language into Trump's speeches.
Yep.
He was kind of boasting about his advocacy for villain of the pod, Mike Pompeo, like getting in there in front of the Emiratis. He was... we talked on the podcast at the beginning of the Trump administration. If you took a list of things that the Emiratis would want from the United States government, that was basically what the Trump foreign policy was.
Yeah, they were
right?
blockading Qatar.
So they blockaded Qatar. They embraced Mohammed bin Salman. The first overseas trip by Donald Trump, the president of the United States, was to Saudi Arabia. They embraced Sisi, Trump's favorite dictator in Egypt. They subsequently backed up Mohammed bin Salman after the brutal murder of Jamal Khashoggi. All the insane things are happening in the Gulf, like the Lebanese prime minister being taken hostage.
I often forget about that.
They escalated support for the war in Yemen,
Yeah.
the Saudis and Emiratis. So literally, the foreign policy was kind of subcontracted out to Abu Dhabi and Riyadh. And clearly, part of the reason why was not Donald Trump's kind of longstanding expertise on Middle East issues.
No.
Clearly, it was an effort to kind of curry favor with the Gulf autocrats who have a lot of money, right? And so to me, the two issues that demand further exploration here are who else was on the take here? I mean, again, Jared Kushner, as we know, was WhatsApp buddies with all these guys in the Gulf, right?
Yeah.
Like what promises were being made, what real estate investments were being made. This really does merit further investigation because it feels like the evidence is hiding in plain sight that the entire foreign policy of the United States was kind of corrupted. Oh, never mind the withdrawal from the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal that the Emiratis and Saudis didn't like, you know?
Yeah, and also, so I was talking to someone who used to work at DOJ about this. It wasn't clear in any of the charging documents but what the payment was to Barrack. Tom Barrack, by the way, is a billionaire, right?
And made, though, gobs of money in the Emirates,
So
right?
it was probably like investments, right?
Yes.
He was hoping to get pay off. So again, I nailed it for the home team. That was a quote when he read a bunch of UAE provided talking points in a TV interview. He also apparently pushed for himself to be the U.S. ambassador to the UAE or special envoy to the region. He pleaded innocent, but was freed from jail after paying a $250 million bond. So they were really worried that this guy's like got a private jet, got a bunch of buddies in non-extradition countries. Like, we may never see him again. I guess there were 2 other guys charged. One fled the country in 2018 after his interview with law enforcement, hasn't been seen again. So Barrack must have known this was coming. I mean, like, I guess that's my question to you, Ben. Like, do you think Barrack was the UAE's ace in the hole, or like, is this the tip of the iceberg?
No, that's the thing. So not only is there the question of like just whether there was other, illegal activity in terms of corruption, but one of the interesting things about this story is you saw a bunch of people dunking on Barrack and maybe people taking shots at Trump. What about the conversation about the extent of the influence that the UAE has in Washington? There was a lot of noticeable silence on that because it is an incredibly far-reaching influence operation that this relatively small country runs in Washington on a regular basis. They pour money into think tanks. They pour money into lobbying. They pour money into speaking engagements for former officials who might be future officials. They pour money, obviously, into buying weapons, and then the defense contractors are kind of in the pocket of the Gulf and advocate for their interests. And some of this is legal, right? It's not illegal to do a bunch of the stuff I just said. But I felt, when I was in government, like there was something gross about this. I remember, Tommy, for instance, like I used to constantly detect the Emirati line criticizing our foreign policy in the media and in the kind of think tank industry. And then you'd read in certain publications, spotted at the lavish Wolfgang Puck as the chef party at the Emirati ambassador's residence. And then there's a list of like everybody who was trashing us, right?
That is verbatim, by the way. It was like always Wolfgang Puck.
No, it was always, and so literally.
Gives you a sense of the money.
Yeah, like you have journalists or think tankers or former officials or members of Congress like rubbing elbows, partying it up, with this kind of opulence, right, that is funded by the Saudis and the Emiratis. And, like this was like a real problem for us. And like I couldn't like even with the megaphone of the White House, I couldn't compete with the megaphone that like the UAE had in Washington. And this is like the least well-kept secret in Washington here. So it's not just Barrack. And I should say it's not just the illegal activity that he was engaged in. Like why is there so much influence from basically autocratic countries that don't necessarily have the same interests that we have, and they've spent a lot of time and a lot of money convincing everybody that we do have the same interests, that somehow we need to have tens of thousands of troops to counter Iran in that region and all this stuff. Like, hopefully, and I'm not that hopeful, but I would like to think that pulling the thread on this case and others might at least force a reckoning and at least a greater degree of self-awareness of the fact that, because, the funny thing is the Emiratis, in a weird way, I don't blame them. Like, why wouldn't they do this? They're good at what they do.
This is how they think business gets done.
This is how they do business. It's not, in a weird way, it's not like their fault.
We have to police ourselves.
Yeah, exactly. Like, we have to be mindful that if somebody is spending this much time, effort, and money to try to persuade you to do what they want you to do, that's an influence operation. Right. It's not necessarily, what's in the best interest of the United States.
We'll see how this plays out. Really rich guys tend to get off on these charges. FAIR is a weird law. It's inconsistently enforced. It's kind of confusing. So I don't know how it'll play out. But it was instructive to learn all the things he was deeply involved in at the different moments along the way.
If you care about democracy, these aren't just countries that are autocratic in their own countries. They have been subsidizing autocracy across like a pretty broad swath of territory in the Middle East and North Africa.
Yeah, let's stay in the Middle East and turn to Iraq, because on Monday, President Biden met with Iraqi Prime Minister Mustafa Al-Kadhimi in the Oval Office. They laid out a plan to shift the U.S. military mission in Iraq from some combat role to an entirely advisory and training role by the end of 2021. The U.S. currently has about 2,500 troops in Iraq. It seems like that number won't change much. There were some initial reports out of Iraq that made it sound like the Prime Minister might come to Washington and demand that all U.S. troops go home. I think that was a bit of a garble. It was more about like defining what they do there. Then, back in 2011, you remember this well. President Obama declared the end to the combat mission in Iraq before having to send troops back in 2014 to deal with ISIS. How significant do you think this announcement is that like the mission is shifting just formally to the training role?
On the one hand, it's kind of an indication of where we are in the ISIS campaign, right? That there's not a feeling that there's such a threat from ISIS that U.S. troops, U.S. special forces kind of need to be out there engaged in combat operations. So that's a positive sign, right, that the security situation has improved there. I don't know if the troops are basically just staying there and they're kind of on bases. That it's not like a seismic shift or anything. But I think what it does point to is, you look at Afghanistan by contrast, right, and how bad it looks there. Iraq has a lot of problems, a lot of dysfunction, a lot of Iranian influence, and a lot of intercommunal rivalry, and some questions about how democratic the government is. But there's some signs of progress and stabilization taking place there, and the hope is that over time that can lead to Iraq evolving into a more normal country, which it hasn't been since the U.S. invasion. So I think this is like a sign of modest progress, and hopefully we can build on that with the Iraqis and other countries that support Iraq to finally try to have this country emerge from what has been a pretty awful decade plus.
Yeah, truly awful. Okay, Ben. Unfortunately, now we have to talk about ice cream. I did not want to talk about this, but here we are.
Here we are.
Yeah,
I wrote and deleted a lot of tweets about this.
Yeah, it's just, anyway. So here's the backstory. Last week, Ben & Jerry's, yes, the ice cream company, they announced that they would no longer sell their products in the occupied West Bank because the company felt that doing so was inconsistent with its values and support for social justice movements. The ice cream will still be available in Israel. It sounds ridiculous even saying this out loud. The ice cream will still be available in Israel proper, but Ben & Jerry's will not sell their products in the West Bank, presumably parts of East Jerusalem, Gaza, the Golan Heights. You might hear this and think, good for them. That's a small but principled stand for an ice cream company. You might think, I don't give a shit. It's ice cream. I'm guessing you didn't hear this lay down and think any of these quotes. Ben & Jerry's quote, has decided to brand itself as the anti-Israel ice cream, or that the decision was, quote, a new form of terror, or that this was, quote, a shameful surrender to anti-Semitism. Those are quotes from the Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett, President Isaac Herzog, and Foreign Minister Yair Lapid, the moderate, describing Ben & Jerry's decision. Many of them tried to link it to the BDS movement, the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, because, I guess it sounds boycott-like, although it's not really. Ironically, several Israeli politicians, including disgraced former Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu, called for a boycott of Ben & Jerry's products, so whatever. Republican U.S. Senator James Langford of Oklahoma even called on his state to block the sale of all Ben & Jerry's. So, Ben, this insane overreaction is why neither of us, I think, wanted to deal with this. It took less than a week to go from, sales of ice cream to a company founded by two Jewish men being potentially banned from Oklahoma. So in summary, what these guys did is not BDS. I have no idea if ice cream sales will help the Palestinian cause. Right before we started recording, I read a story that said the Israeli government has formed a special task force to pressure Ben & Jerry's to reverse their decision. I guess what they're doing maybe is trying to make this as painful as possible for Ben & Jerry's and intimidate other companies from following suit. I don't know. What did you make of this?
First of all, the Israeli government's response is kind of telling on itself because they're saying, Ben & Jerry's, that they're not going to sell ice cream in Israeli settlements, in illegally occupied Palestinian territories under international law. The Israeli government, not Ben & Jerry's, is the one that's saying this is a boycott of all of Israel. They're basically saying that all of the settlements are part of Israel, right? So that is problematic, to say the least, right? Because the logic train then suggests that, okay, therefore you're kind of de facto annexing all of the Palestinian territory by saying that if someone refuses to sell ice cream there, they're refusing to sell it in Israel proper. That, to me, kind of reveals the fundamental tension here, right? Which is that Israel wants to be viewed as a full democracy while also wanting to have the capacity to indefinitely rule, govern, have authority over the Palestinians, right? So that there's that problem, right? Then there's this question of the insanity of mounting a maximum pressure campaign.
Which is, Ben is quoting from an Axios headline.
Yes.
Scoop, Israel launches maximum pressure campaign against Ben & Jerry's. Now, that may be tongue-in-cheek, but it is the language normally reserved for Iran.
Well, and Lapid said something along the lines of, there's all these states that have passed BDS laws, and I'm going to call on all of them to go after Ben & Jerry's, right? And what is this really about? I mean, I remember when, at the end of the Obama administration, we abstained on a UN Security Council resolution condemning continued Israeli settlements. Mm-hmm. And Israel went completely nuclear, and they concocted, conspiracy theories about information they had about what we were doing behind the scenes to do this, and they attacked, people like me who were out being spokespeople for these decisions, even though it was the end of the Obama administration. Trump was coming in. Trump was already embracing them. This resolution was not going to change anything, right?
No, not at all.
And a friend of mine who's a very smart and astute analyst on Israeli policy said to me, you have to understand the Israeli mindset of deterrence, right? And I always thought this was a really interesting comment. He's like, everything that they do is meant to kind of have maximum deterrent, right?
So raise the cost on you personally.
Yeah, so if you look at, the most extreme version militarily, the Gaza war all these Gaza wars seem excessive. It seems like, why do they have to destroy all of this infrastructure to get at Hamas? Well, it's to impose the maximum cost on a whole range of people, including innocent civilians, to kind of send the message it's not worth opposing us militarily. Which again, that's like a conventional military deterrent strategy. It's not totally out of left field. However, what's interesting about Israel is they do the same thing kind of diplomatically in American politics if they sense some threat, right? So what they see is there's a growing movement on the left in this country to question U.S. support for the Israeli government, to question why, certain businesses are operating in Israeli settlements, for instance. And so what they're going to do is they're going to take one brand that everybody's heard of, and that everybody already thinks of as kind of lefty, right? I mean,
example.
It's Ben & Jerry's. A couple hippie guys,
fish food,
had a great idea out in Vermont, and I've been to the factory. It's
Didn't
good
they
stuff.
Support Bernie too?
They sort of support Bernie. They're deadheads. There's tie dye, the whole thing. So everybody kind of already thinks of these guys as kind of lefties.
Right.
And
so they sold to Unilever in the 80s. So
yeah,
it's a corporate conglomerate.
Now it is, but
totally the ethos of the company.
And so they're just going to nuke these people, to send a deterrent message to any other company or person who might consider having an opinion on these things, that we're going to make it so awful for you. And look, in looking at it, the judgment is, okay, that might be very effective, or it might invite a backlash.
Yeah.
And I think it's actually probably effective. But I also think that the facts on the ground, as we've talked about, it's becoming increasingly obvious that Israel has no interest in a two-state solution. And so they keep trying to make the conversation about anything other than what are the circumstances for the Palestinians in East Jerusalem, in Gaza, in the West Bank. Yeah. If the conversation is about that, that's a very awkward conversation for them. If the conversation is about BDS, or frankly, if they're kind of tarring anybody who opposes them as anti-Semites, that's a different conversation.
I totally agree. I'm sure there's boardrooms who might be considering a similar decision or course of action who think, man, that's a lot of smoke. I don't want to deal with that. But to be clear, this is not BDS. This is not a new form of terror. This is not anti-Semitism. No. It's ice cream.
It's also kind of
ice cream.
It's offensive to victims of terrorism.
Well, it's also there's a boy who cried wolf thing here. It's anti-Semitism is a real problem in the world. Terrorism is a real problem in the world.
Yeah.
Ice cream is not that.
Yeah. No. Well, that's the thing is anti-Semitism. I honestly this makes it harder to focus in on the very virulent and problematic anti-Semitism on the right and elements of the left these days.
Totally.
If you're saying that Ben and Jerry's, not selling some ice cream in a West Bank settlement is anti-Semitism.
I can't get half-baked in my kibbutz. Like, give me a break.
And here's the thing that bothers me about this, and it bothers me with how broad they paint this, BDS movement with it. Like, I don't like anybody trying to force Americans or anybody else for that matter to self-censor. It's in the same way that I don't like, China trying to tell the NBA they can't have an opinion about Hong Kong. I don't like the Israeli government trying to tell Ben and Jerry's they can't have an opinion about selling ice cream in the West Bank. Like we should be able to make our own decisions about what we buy and where we sell things and what we say about stuff.
It does have that feeling, that sort of maximalist, we're going to come down on you like a ton of bricks vibe that we saw with China and the NBA.
Yeah. And it's just like, you better just shut up about anything having to do with, again, not just what's happening in Israel. This is not about what's happening in Israel. This is about what's happening in the Palestinian territories, in Israeli settlements deep into the West Bank. I mean, is it really such an Israeli national interest that Cherry Garcia be available to settlers? Like, I don't think so.
If I were their political strategist, I would say take a couple pitches.
Yeah.
You don't always have to swing, for God's sake. It's fucking ice cream.
Yeah.
It's ice cream. You mentioned China, Ben. So last week, President Xi Jinping of China became the first Chinese leader to visit Tibet in 30 years. The occasion, a happy one, was to mark the 70th anniversary of China invading and occupying Tibet. So I'm sure they were thrilled to see him. According to Chinese state media, Xi told local officials to push Tibetans to identify more with the, quote, great motherland, Chinese people, Chinese culture, and Chinese Communist Party and socialism with Chinese characteristics. He also reportedly said that rejuvenation of the Chinese nation will only occur when people follow the party. Xi visited some cultural and religious sites, which is odd since the Chinese Communist Party is not usually a big fan of those kinds of things. No. Tibet has been under the control of the Chinese Communist Party since 1951. Not invited to meet with Xi was the leader of Tibetan Buddhism, the Dalai Lama, who is in exile and called a dangerous separatist by the Chinese government. This is Xi's third visit to Tibet in his career. I think he went in the 80s. He went a couple years ago when he was vice president. Ben, what did you make of this? I didn't know what to make of it beyond to feel like it was kind of ominous given the ongoing cultural genocide happening to the Uyghurs, but I don't know. What was your take?
The Chinese Communist Party spent many years, decades, trying to repopulate Tibet with more Han Chinese, trying to discredit the Dalai Lama as some kind of terrorist separatist, trying to claim that they have the right to determine who the next Dalai Lama is, trying to eradicate the kind of cultural and linguistic and religious traditions of the Tibetan people. Like, this was kind of before Hong Kong and before Xinjiang and the Uyghur situation. This was the first, one of the first areas where you saw them trying to kind of impose a uniform identity on territory where there were, ethnic and religious groups that believed different things and spoke different language and had different traditions. And to me, I think what's, particularly eerie, concerning about this visit at this time, when you see China being much more aggressive, the Chinese Communist Party, that is like, you look at what's happening in Xinjiang, you look at what's happening in Hong Kong, and then you look at Taiwan.
Yep.
And the message consistently, right, is like, we are going to determine everything that happens in the space that we claim as part of China. And we don't care about international opinion. Oh, by the way, in Tibet, they have basically silenced. Remember, there used to be like a whole movement around Tibetan freedom concerts. Like, you and I are old enough to remember, like, the Beastie Boys.
Stickers on cars.
And the Dalai Lama was an icon. Well, they've kind of snuffed that out. Like, nobody really raises Tibetan human rights anymore. And the Dalai Lama is very old and doesn't have the same cachet, in part because they've bullied people into no longer meeting with the Dalai Lama. And so I think, the example of Tibet, unfortunately, it's an example of what they would like to see happen in a lot of other places, including Hong Kong and Taiwan. And at a certain point, the question is, in Taiwan, is that going to cause a conflict? And in Hong Kong, how far are they going to go? And they've already suggested that they're going to go as far as they've gone everywhere else,
Yeah. Let's do a good news story in terms of a political transition and close the loop on a political crisis in Samoa, basically gripping the country since May. Fiame Naomi Mataafa will be sworn in as Samoa's first female prime minister. She won the election back in April, but the ruling party, the guys she beat, did everything possible to keep her from taking office, including locking the doors of the parliament and denying her entry into the building on the days she was supposed to be sworn in. They did this kind of ad hoc swearing-in ceremony on the lawn. This crisis finally ended when the Samoan Supreme Court told them to cut the shit and basically let her take over the government this week. Interestingly, Ben, one of the first moves she will make is to kill a Chinese-backed port development project that costs $100 million. So I'm sure Beijing is not thrilled about that. I wonder if they'll start sounding off. But, some good news here.
The Stop the Steal movement in Samoa didn't go all the way.
No, it didn't pan out.
And look, this is going to continue to, we mentioned this before, but this is going to be characteristic of these small Pacific Island nations where China wants to throw some money around and then have a total say in their politics. And, they're going to be kind of caught in between this U.S.-China geopolitical rivalry. And what you just hope is that as in this case, they can make their own decisions and that the rule of law can hold. So, positive story here for Samoans. But it's going to, it's not the end of the story. It's going to continue to be a challenge. I'm sure China's not going to end its effort to try to exert influence in this area.
Yeah, that sounds right to me. Okay, well, now I'll do a little more positive, a little positive spin for the UAE here, because I don't know if you saw this story, but scientists in the UAE have literally figured out how to make it rain. They fly drones.
Well, they already make it rain. I mean, yeah.
Tom Barrack.
Tom Barrack, yeah.
They fly drones into clouds. The drones release some sort of electrical charge, which makes it rain. Which is pretty cool. Sounds a bit like playing God, but it's pretty cool and could be important for a country like the UAE that faces a severe drought in the middle of a desert, sinking water tables. I guess there's similar cloud seeding technology that's used to make it snow in some Western states, though it's a different technology that basically they sprinkle dry ice into these clouds to try to make it so. Not clear if it's all that effective. I don't know. I guess I'm just happy to see one of the craziest government conspiracy theories come true, that we can control the weather. I mean, that's not every day.
And again, the Emirates, we've criticized them. I mean, they have definitely been at the tip of the spear of a lot of innovation too. I'll be the cloud and because I've been particularly terrified of climate change recently.
All day, every day.
And I was, looking into some of these efforts to affect the weather, right? And I think in Russia, for instance, they're doing the same thing to make it rain, to kind of put out some fires and things like that. And one of the challenges that might emerge is as individual nations get this capacity to control the weather and understandably use it, right, to deal with drought or what have you, or put out fires. I don't think there's a full understanding of how that affects kind of broader weather patterns.
Yeah.
Because the weather doesn't tend to recognize national boundaries, and so there is another area where there's going to have to be international cooperation for these kind of weather altering technologies, so that one country isn't inadvertently or intentionally screwing another. But for the time being, welcome the innovation. Clearly, we're going to need all of it to deal with climate change, but we're also going to need to make sure that it's not compounding other problems.
Yeah, no, controlling the weather, what could go wrong? I went down a bit of a rabbit hole in this, and I guess the U.S. military experimented with weather as a weapon in Vietnam. They wanted to make it rain to screw with supply routes. I'm not sure that would have worked. And then in 1977, there was a treaty banning the use of weather modification for military purposes. So the more you know.
So, there you go. I mean, because with climate, the models are right in terms of what they're predicting in terms of the warming of the planet. But where the models seem to have underappreciated the effects of climate change is on how the weather patterns could be affected in ways that could lead to more extreme weather events.
Yep. Like the flooding we saw in China.
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't put that in the show because it was really hard to figure out what the real numbers even are.
Yeah. I mean, just astonishing.
Astonishing floods. Okay, Ben, so we're going to transition to our Olympics segment here. First question, what's your favorite thing you watched?
I have to say, the Olympic watching experience has been transformed somewhat by having kids. And it's very cool to have kids and be introducing them to the Olympics for the first time. So me personally, I was really into watching like our Alaskan swimmer like crush it and win a gold medal.
That was cool.
I was really into watching our women's volleyball team is just fucking badass. But my kids, like the dressage came on, right? And we were joking about this before the pod, but like normally kind of switch the channel or I like scroll
you make
up
a Mitt
Peacock.
Romney joke.
Rafalka,
Yeah.
But like my daughters like could not get their brains around these giant dancing horses,
They're cool.
And so suddenly it's a good example of how when you have kids, like your whole experience of sports and media changes. Like I'm sitting there watching and kind of appreciate, I guess I'm inviting some shit here, but like it's part of what I love about the Olympics is like there are people that all they do is learn how to make like some horse dance.
Yeah.
Now, granted, I know this is kind of a privileged sport, but like
Just a touch.
across the board, like volleyball is the same thing. The amount of time that people have put into doing these somewhat obscure things is very cool to me.
And then like the number, watching volleyball, you just realize how many like 6'5" to 6'7" men and women there are in the world who can just hammer a ball like 100 miles an hour.
Yeah, yeah.
It's unbelievable.
Well, I have to say too, I was kind of like, I enjoyed watching the men's basketball, even though we lost. And don't at me, this is not a Trump comment, because I was kind of proud as an American that everybody else has gotten so good at this game that kind of we created is kind of weirdly a validation of like, it will take that. Like, now granted, I think they're going to figure it out. Like I'm waiting to like, the U.S. team to find the other gear here.
Yeah, I bet they will too. I kind of like the weird sports. Like I don't need to see, I just watched the NBA finals. I don't need to see more basketball, but like, do you see any handball?
Yeah.
Where you kind of like just leap into some area and gun the thing. I watched a little rugby last night, and I pissed a lot of people off by saying that the rules are incomprehensible. I stand by that statement and the edible I took while drafting it. But I admire how tough those people are. They're just like, I don't know, it's like football without pads. They're just crushing each other. It's very impressive. We are at the point of the Olympics, though, where I'm like, okay, I've seen enough swimming probably.
Well, but the Tunisian
that was really cool.
Yeah. I mean, like that's a kind of moment that can only happen at the Olympics, right? Same thing with like a swimmer from Alaska, right? Where there's like I think 150-meter pool in the whole state, but like for a Tunisian guy to win, that everybody in Tunisia is like freaking out about that in a good way.
Everyone should check out this video. So he's an 18-year-old Tunisian guy, Ahmed Hafnoui. He won a surprise gold medal in the 400-meter freestyle. He had the slowest qualifying time of all 8 people in his heat, but he managed to pull it out. And there's a viral video of his family back in Tunisia basically like filming themselves watching the race, and they lose their mind, and it's like the most pure, awesome thing. Yeah.
So there was a viral video of, the people in Alaska watching Lydia Jacoby win, including like her classmates and everything, people like freaking out, and then cuts to her parents and they're crying. And I'm kind of tearing up. To go back to where we started, like made me so pissed about like Trump and this culture war stuff entering into the Olympics, because I remember as a kid like feeling like we were all backing these athletes. Can't we just like all find unity in sports here? Like that's what the Olympics are supposed to be about. It's not supposed to be like a venue for your culture war.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if people saw this Phoenix rally. Trump raised the women's soccer team losing to Sweden. He said it was because of wokeism. He got them all to boo them. It's just like, it's so hard for me to get over a president of the United States rooting against an Olympic team, rooting against America, and the sort of feeling of political impotence that comes from not immediately knowing that we can use that clip to bury his political career. Like in a just world, that's what would happen.
Well, and because like in a weird way, like we're talking about Tunisia, which is obviously going through a bunch of shit right now, but like it makes me happy that other countries are so pumped too. Like I obviously want the U.S. athletes to win. I'm usually rooting for them, obviously, unless like they're just not in the competition. But like I'm happy for the other countries when they're totally psyched, particularly if it's like a small country.
Like
right?
the Philippines, Philippine weightlifter won the gold medal, and it was like the best thing to happen to the country to win. It's just cool.
Yeah.
I'm into it. Let's go to a question I think some people might have, which is why the Russian team has such a weird name.
The Rock.
The Rock. And they can't use their country name, flag, or anthem. So the short answer is because they're cheaters. And never forget that. They're a bunch of cheaters. The Russia Olympic Committee team, or the Rock, they're using that name because it's part of their punishment for using PEDs, performance-enhancing drugs, and conspiring to cover up the evidence of that PED use at the Sochi Olympics. The penalty extends through the 2022 Winter Olympics as well. So these Russian athletes who weren't part of the doping, weren't subject to the suspension, can still participate, but just in this weird, confusing way. To me, this doesn't seem like much of a punishment for like a bunch of people taking steroids in a systematic way and covering it up. I don't know. They're still basically competing.
Just so people get the fact that this was like a next level cheating shit, like Putin as Bond villain kind of thing. The Russians were hosting the Sochi Olympics. The Russians have like this kind of fixation on the Olympics. Obviously, Putin does himself. And yeah, a lot of athletes are, doping. This was the most systemic thing. Like the Russian intelligence services were like brought into this scheme to like help, falsify test results. Like this was like, industrial scale doping. This wasn't just like a bunch of people were taking stuff. This was like, in a way, the athletes were not the guilty people because it seemed like they didn't have a choice. It was it was kind of like the Russian authorities like, you must win. We will dope you and we will falsify results. And
careful with the table. And
the FSB is going to be involved and all this stuff. So yeah, I on the one hand, you don't want to punish athletes, but on the other hand, you're right. Like, apart from the fact that they have to play like Tchaikovsky instead of the Russian national anthem, and they have a weird name, there's not like that much of a punishment,
No, they got a cooler name. They're the Rock now.
The Rock it's kind of ominous. It's very fitting the geopolitical moment that the Russians are there, even though they cheated. They're still allowed to participate, and they have this kind of scary name, and I don't know.
There's a similar dynamic happening with Taiwan, which has to use the title Chinese Taipei. So this dates back to an agreement they made with the International Olympic Committee in 1981 that lets Taiwan compete, but it skirts the issue of whether Taiwan is a sovereign nation. How do you think that's going to play out in 2022 when the games are in China?
I tell this story in the in After the Fall, which everybody should buy then, but my book, which is one of the young Hong Kongers I talked to said that the first moment when she kind of began to freak out a bit was in the 2012 Olympics. There was a Hong Kong kind of pop star who expressed support for like Hong Kong athletes who were participating in the Olympics and got like trolled on an industrial scale by like millions of Chinese internet users, and it seemed like there was a state hand behind that, like it was kind of an information campaign. And she kind of had to apologize because kind of the message was, you won't be able to sell your records in China if you talk. And it's like this infection of, again, sports with politics is really fucking annoying. And why can't the Taiwanese athletes just like participate as they would like to participate? I'm sure they think of themselves as Taiwanese. Like Chinese Taipei doesn't mean anything to anybody.
Yeah, I think it's insulting to them.
Yeah.
And the other thing I'm just preemptively anxious about is what Donald Trump is going to put on his stupid blog about Simone Biles, who pulled out of the gymnastics competition citing mental health issues. I also was reading more about her decision, and ESPN had a pretty good article on it that was talking about how like the stuff she does is just so insanely hard that if you're not really like mentally fully there, you can really hurt yourself, and that might have part of why she was shaken and didn't want to compete. I don't know.
Yeah, so I've gone through a roller coaster of emotions since my wife woke me up at 4 o'clock in the morning.
Oof.
Because she was a gymnast. I don't know if you know that. She was a competitive gymnast, right? So she's like deep on gymnastics, right? And I see this vault go wrong, and Anne is like, that was way off. Like it wasn't just like a not a good vault. Like she was
pulled out of it.
Like she didn't do her move right in the air, and that could have been dangerous. And she was even surprised that she was even able to land. And then she pulls out, and I'm like, I thought about this all day, and I have a take, right?
Give it to me.
And I know not everybody needs a take on everything. You're right. The Bo Burnham rule. Like, people
listen, I quote Bo Burnham, not directed at you. I just directed it at Twitter.
Here's my take, right? Because you made one point that is absolutely true, which is I'm already dreading the culture warification of this. But I'm going to connect Patrick Ewing to Simone Biles,
Okay,
here, which
good.
is a strange take.
I'm here for this
follow
journey.
me on this, right? Because this is a different cultural aspect in how it interacts with sports. I love Patrick Ewing growing up, right? He was a great basketball player. The Knicks were really good for like a decade.
Mm-hmm.
They made the finals a couple times. He never won a ring.
Right.
And there's this new culture where, like, if you don't win a ring, you're like a failure.
Yeah.
This kind of rings culture in the NBA, like Barkley, Ewing.
Yeah.
These people are total failures. Like, never mind that he had a great career. He's like an all-star, a dream teamer, like gave a lot of joy to a lot of people, right? Simone Biles won this boatload of gold medals in Rio, right? And it's like there's a GOAT culture now, right? Where it's like, no, you have to just get better and better and better. And she was doing things, because Anne's been telling me, like, that you're not kind of supposed, like you could break your neck if you don't land like her moves the right way, because they're so far and beyond what a normal human would do, right? Clearly, like, something in the culture was pushing this extraordinary athlete who's already like the best gymnast we've seen to just do stuff that like was well beyond like what like a human should be asked to do. It wasn't like good enough like that she just win gold medals, right? And it puts her in a position where she knows if she's not on that day, she could really hurt herself, right? And so is she going to, knowing that she's not on and like there's something not right in terms of how she's feeling or how she's thinking, is she going to compete in multiple events where she could have like a really catastrophic injury? Like, how did we get to a point where she felt like she had to do those things?
Yeah, the Carrie Strug rejoinder that you're seeing, like, well, she competed with like a broken ankle. Well, is that good? Do we want little kids competing with broken bones?
Yeah,
I don't know.
The playing hurt thing is tricky, right? Because like like some of the iconic moments, right, are people playing hurt. I guess to my Ewing point, it's just like in listening to her give interviews leading into these Olympics, it didn't feel like there was a ton of joy in how perfect she felt like she had to be, Why can't it be good enough she's just like the best gymnast and can win gold medals? Like, she clearly like felt pressured to ascend to some level that is probably beyond what any human being should even do, and so that's my weird take as I thought about this, of just like, there's clearly something that was pressuring her to kind of go beyond, like nobody else in the competition even tries to do anything like the things that she does. Like, couldn't she just do a routine and win a gold medal?
I think she's pushing herself to do the biggest, baddest, hardest routines, right? She's a fucking super competitive person.
But then everybody gets into it and it's like wants to see her be like superhuman, and it's kind of like why can't we just see athletes be humans and win competitions?
Yeah, I'm all for like shitting on highly paid professional athletes when fans feel like it, because that's kind of like part of the bargain, right? Like, you get tons of money, you get adulation, and in return people can say terrible things about you on Twitter, and that's kind of the deal now, even though it's a little bit gross. I do think the Olympics are different to me. I mean, the women's gymnastics team has like kind of transcended the normal Olympian status, right? They're not like a person you hear about for a couple weeks every 4 years. They're like stars. They're celebrities. They're really cool, and rightly so. They're incredibly good. What I'm trying to say is, I don't think they owe us any. Like, you don't owe it to people to compete if you don't feel like it's safe for you. I think people could be disappointed. You can be sad you don't get to see her compete, but I think like I am preemptively worried about the culture war shit for the same reasons you are, that like someone's going to attack her for the mental health reasons or something, and it's going to create a conversation that is like deeply unhelpful.
Well, and because if you just the amount, I mean, we'll step back and Pod say the world is not the best venue and we're not the best cultural critics, but like
disagree.
But there's something about U.S. women's gymnastics where the perfection demanded of these young girls, because it starts when they're girls, by an entity that refused to protect them against sexual predation.
A disgusting
right?
organization. Disgusting organization.
And then, insist on them becoming goddesses every 4 years because they have to be the heroes in the face of Summer Olympics, all the way from Mary Lou Retton, it's my earliest memory, to today. Like, there's just something off about that. And that's where I get it. Like, just something was kind of propelling this extraordinary athlete to feel like it wasn't good enough that she was the best gymnast, that she had to basically be like an astronaut, on the vault, or like that made it dangerous for her to perform on a day when she didn't have it,
And, she actually, in one of the articles I was reading, cited the fact that the Larry Nassar abuse revelations, who was the trainer who abused so many of these young girls, and the fact that the organization didn't have her back, and yet she's like told to go out there and perform for them and do these risky things. Yeah. When I first heard about what happened, that didn't occur to me. Then I read more about what she said. I was like, well, of course. Like, why would she give a shit about, want to do anything for this organization? I'm not saying her country. I'm saying this Olympic committee that didn't get their backs.
And the common thread to connect this all is like, we should have our athletes back. Like whether they're the women's soccer team or Simone Biles or whoever the hell. I think Donald Trump said he was rooting against like the men's basketball team because they're too woke for him too. Like,
he could tackle LeBron.
I support, like, there's probably some right winger like athlete. Like, I thought Kurt Schilling's a MAGA nut. You're a Red Sox fan. I bet you thought it was cool when he pitched to the World Series in 2004. Like we need some spaces that are not about politics.
I totally agree. I will always have a soft spot for what Schilling did for Boston.
Even though he probably thinks you and I are
literally. Like, I think he's attacked me on Twitter before. And I was like, dude, I cared about you. Yeah. Johnny Damon's a total MAGA
Lenny
guy.
Dykstra, totally MAGA guy, right? Total.
Also a psychopath.
Train wreck psychopath. But nails 86 Mets. Like, I was into that.
Yeah, no, me too. Trump's the short description of where Trump lands on this is, if you take a knee and support black people in America, he writes you off, and he doesn't support you anymore. You're not an American to him anymore. If you take a knee, support Black Lives Matter, speak out on social justice issues, unless you are like full steam behind him, Donald Trump, you're not a real American, and he won't root for you.
And one last point to tie together some Pods of the World threads here. Like, if they let the athletes use marijuana, which is legal, like, might address, like, chill them out a little bit. Like, I'd like to be seeing this sprinter.
Sha'Carri Richardson.
Yeah, I'd like to be seeing her running this week too.
Thanks to the Olympics for giving us a lot to talk about. Okay, talk to you guys next week.